Stuart, when you hear her say the door was open when they first found out the mom was missing, why are we hearing about this now?
You know, Jesse, I watched this interview several times, in fact, multiple times today with some of my colleagues, and we really tore it apart. And for the life of us, there are a lot of questions, a lot more questions than answers. And I don't have an answer for why we are just hearing about the back door. But let me just quickly go through several points. Number one is Savannah Guthrie tells us that when her sister calls her, first calls her, Savannah goes, "You better call the police." Well, the sister says, "No, the police are here already." You know, Jesse, using common sense, if a loved one goes missing, the first thing you're going to do is call or text the people that are closest to that person to find out if you've heard from that person. That in and of itself seems a little odd to me as to why the sister or brother or anybody did not reach out to Savannah Guthrie prior to calling the police or while they were waiting for the police. There's about a 12-minute gap between the time 911 is called to the time the police arrive. That's number one. Number two is, this would be the last scenario of an 84-year-old lady who has physical limitations that anybody would contemplate kidnapping for a ransom. There was nothing that would have been consistent at the very onset to lead anybody to believe that Nancy Guthrie was the target of a kidnapping for ransom. That statement in and of itself causes me to now have a lot of questions as to how someone would have even gotten to that point from just being on the phone prior to showing up. Number three is Savannah Guthrie offered later on in her interview with some very specific facts that her mother left the house in her pajamas without her shoes. How did Savannah Guthrie know that at the time her mother left the house, she was clothed in her pajamas without her shoes on? That leads me to believe that law enforcement perhaps has other video that, quite frankly, they have not disclosed. Unless Nancy Guthrie only had one pair of shoes in that house, how would anybody be able to know that she left the house without her shoes on? That's a very specific material fact, and it caused us to pause and wonder. There's a lot of things that we just don't know.
You know, you bring up three really interesting observations. I don't, you know, I'm not an investigator, but you know how these things go, and I can't explain the things that you're raising either. The notes, the two notes, she says, she still believes those weren't hoaxes. Well, what does that tell you?
She not only said that two of the ransom notes with specificity she believes are real, she actually also suggested that it was one kidnapper. She never refers to individuals, meaning plural. If you go back and listen to her interview, she talks about one person. And so that leads me to believe that in those ransom notes, and again, there may have been some clues within those notes. By way of example, we took your mom in her pajamas. You will notice that those pajamas are not there. We took her without her shoes. Her shoes or her slippers are still by her bedside. And so there is some specific facts that are known to law enforcement that, quite frankly, they're keeping very close to the vest. I will just say this to you, that this interview, I don't think helped the investigation. In fact, if anything, I think it may have hurt. I think it also may have hurt their credibility because there are just things that just, quite frankly, don't add up. And statistically, these cases generally lead back to someone who's within that inner circle.
Wow, that's a strong statement, Stuart. We'll see how it plays out. Why would, putting the credibility issue aside, why would this interview hurt the investigation?
I'm not saying that it hurts the investigation, but I do believe that less is more, because the more information you let out to the general public, and obviously there is an individual, at least one individual, because we saw them on that Ring doorbell, it gives that person an individual to backtrack and perhaps cover his or her tracks. And so what my suggestion would be is that less is more, allow the investigation to run its course. I don't see any benefit to Savannah Guthrie going on national TV and kind of, opening herself up. Look, it is very upsetting. Clearly, this is a devastating situation for this family. But I'm not so sure that the investigators are in any way supportive of Savannah Guthrie going on a talk show to kind of lay out certain material relevant facts. By way of example, pajamas without her shoes. And by the way, Jesse, if you go back, I believe that Savannah Guthrie said that she heard my mother was begging for mercy. Now, I don't know if that's her interpretation, or is there a recording that was her mom pleading for mercy when she was leaving the house with whoever.